Hello, Paige. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm amazing. And you said you're joining from Boston.
Yes, I'm from Boston. It's not looking too bad outside right now. I think the weather's holding out.
Did you not get the snowstorm?
It just turned into rain, fortunately.
Oh my gosh. Well, they kept hyping this thing up, telling us that we were gonna get so many inches, and then we really didn't. We got snow, but not a lot.
Yeah, I'm thankful for it, honestly. I would have to dig my car out. Not into that.
No, and I thought I was like, I think we're over this, but, and being from the East Coast and then into the Midwest, that we have a lot of similar weather patterns. I went to Boston in 2019 for the Huntington's Disease Society of America convention that they hold every year, in June. And I have driven in Chicago, and that scares me. I don't like big city drive. And when I say big city, when I lived in Nashville, that was a little stressful, but I could handle it. Nothing is like city driving. So Chicago freaked me out. But when I went to Boston and I didn't even drive, but I had someone pick me up from the airport. I think it was I don't know the right word for it. If it was like a trolley or something. But this man, I thought he was going to run over pedestrians, cars. I was like, Boston drivers are the worst.
They are maniacs on the road. It's really every man for themselves out there.
Oh my gosh. How long have you lived there?
Well, so I'm in grad school right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've just been here for 2 years now, but I'm loving it. I don't know how much longer I'll stay here. I definitely liked it because I'm originally from Connecticut. So
so it's still close.
Yeah. And Connecticut's a bit of a weird place where it's kind of just an in-between of New York and Boston.
So it's a flyover state.
It's just a highway. It's a highway in between Connecticut and Boston. And so growing up, it's always where are you going to go? Which way are you going to go? To move into a city. And now that I think I'm in Boston, I don't think I could go to New York. That seems too big, too crazy for me now.
100%. And I haven't even lived in a big city. Yes, Nashville, but I always tell people Nashville is so different because it's a big city in a small town that's just overpopulated, if that makes sense. So it's still it has the city aspect, but then it has a lot of rural areas too. Mm-hmm. So, but I've been to New York a few times. One time was on a high school trip, so it was very much, you're on a schedule, you're sticking to it, you got a chaperone. Then I went, where did I go for the next time? Or was it only 2 times? Maybe it was only twice. I don't know. I went for another HD event. It was the, Hereditary Disease Foundation. They had a gala, and I had 2 friends who were a part of it who invited me. Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay, first of all, what a gala. A New York gala. Oh my gosh. And I was still in college, so you had all these people coming up to you and being like, who are you? What do you do? And I was like, I don't even remember if I think I was a senior at that point, maybe. And I was like, I'm in college. But yeah, that was crazy. I think it was in something that was owned by Harvard or something. It was pretty intense. Yeah, it was crazy. It was I very much felt like I was in an episode of Gossip Girl, but underdressed.
That's awesome.
But my friend also moved from Michigan out to New York, so I saw her that same trip. And it's one of those things where every time I visit, I'm like, this is a lot of fun for knowing that I'm here for a certain period. Because you're doing the tourist thing, you're I'm going to go to the best coffee shops and just cafes and go to here for shopping. But with that being said, I literally have had this conversation before where I was when I think about being there longer than a tourist, I don't know how she does it. I don't know how anyone does it. I would be just, well, again, unless if you're a character from Gossip Girl and that stuff just is irrelevant to you. Yes. So I get what you're saying. I was I love traveling, but I just I wouldn't even want to live in Chicago. And that's literally 90 minutes from where I live now.
Yeah. City life.
I like the exposure, but and that's why I love Nashville so much, because it's you can go get the exposure and then go back to your house.
Totally.
So that's my dream. I'm I want to live somewhere rural and away from people, but then I want access to people when I want, you know? So I'm like, I'm in a condo somewhere like in a city, but then let me like be on the outskirts the other time. But, you know, we need time and money and a better economy for that, so.
I agree.
That's why I love, did you ever, how old are you?
24.
Okay, so we're like, do you turn 25 this year?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're like a year apart then. Did you play Sims growing up?
Of course. Would I live under a rock? Of course I did.
I sometimes still like get the urge to, because I'm like, at least in this world I can like have as many houses as I want, you know, like I can make things perfect. You don't gotta worry about the economy or taxes. You just gotta worry if your sim is like about to die because you're about, like, you haven't gone to the bathroom, you're tired.
I used to play all the time at like one of my really close family friends' house. Like they were like notorious for like when we'd go to their house, we'd be playing Sims, and it was so funny. And I remember like my mom never really understood like what it was, and she just thought it was like a weird thing that I did. So funny.
It was pretty innocent until it went to like making a family, you know? Like, and it wasn't like it was very vivid, but it was just like the like ambiance of it. It was like, yeah, you knew what was going on in order to like have children.
Yeah. Maybe a little too much for me at that age.
Probably, but it got us by. Oh, well, enough about Sims, even though I love Sims. I probably will try and play that later now. Because I have nothing else to do today. I don't like the winter, but I do like being snowed in when I can just like hang out and do nothing or something.
Like, my roommates are gone now, and like, I mean, hopefully they don't listen to this when I say this, but I like love having the apartment to myself. There's something about being home like alone in the winter when it's snowed in and you can kind of just like walk freely.
Oh yeah.
No one's gonna walk in the kitchen with you. Like, the best
nope,
feeling.
I get it. I felt that way when I was still living at home, or like, you know, college and teenage years at home. It's like if no one's home and it's just you. My sister, actually, one of my little sisters, she's 14. She's a freshman in high school, and so she's the same way. Like, if my mom and stepdad leave the house, I'll ask her sometimes, like, if she wants to go somewhere. She's like, no, I want to stay home. She just likes being home alone. I'm like, I get it. That's cool.
Independence.
Yeah. No, she cracks me up. But Boston, do you want to share? Because, you know, jumping into Huntington's, you reached out to me. Was it Instagram you initially reached out to me?
I think it was Facebook.
Oh, you know what? Maybe you're right.
Yeah. I think it was on Facebook because my aunt follows you and was like talking about you and how you're like such a big advocate and voice in the community. And her and my cousin were like the first participants for my thesis.
I remember now. Yep.
And I was like, how do I like get more people to do it? Because initially I had reached out to HDSA, and let me tell you, they were so nice and receptive and helpful, like in terms of research. I sent them an email, or no, I think I DM'd them on Instagram, and they were like,
okay,
send us an email here. And I emailed them, and like within the hour they responded, and they were like, yeah, of course, like these are like tips and tricks that we do to like help people.
Wow, that's cool.
Post, and they were like, we will post you on like our blog, on the website, on the newsletter coming out. And they were just so nice about everything. And then I was just looking for more ways that I could like find participants and have people like spread the word. And then my aunt mentioned you, and then I reached out. And the rest is history. I
do remember this now. Oh my gosh. How long ago did you reach out to HDSA? I'm just curious.
I think in January. Because that's when the newsletter was coming out in like January.
Okay. I don't know. He might have been gone at that point, but there was their main social media guy, Matt. He was there for, I think he started in 2019 because I met him at convention that year. So he was there for just over 3 years. And now he's at an Alzheimer's nonprofit in New York, also, where HDSA is. And so really cool, like similar categories. But I was just curious because he did a lot of that stuff for a long time, you know, all of the like marketing and social media. So it used to be that whenever they'd reach out to like, you know, have me sing in a video that they were going to post for like one of their events or something, it was always for Matt. So I think he might have been gone by January, but still it doesn't surprise me that they were like that.
I talked to.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly, but I just remember honestly being shocked that like within the hour they got back to me and they were like, here is like a website. So you know how like you signed up for my study using that Calendarly app? They were the ones who suggested that. And they were like, this is a really helpful tool that like we find makes it easier than doing the extra step of just like having to like email me or find my contact information rather than just like clicking a link that brings you to a calendar and then like letting you select the time and date that works for you.
Oh my gosh. Using Calendly was literally the most life-changing thing I ever did. And I started doing it maybe like a year and a half ago. But yeah, because it used to just be, when can you do it? When can you do it? When can you? Yeah. And once you start getting enough people who are interested in whatever you're doing, whether it's a study, a podcast, you know, you name it, that can get really overwhelming.
Yeah.
Especially with time zones.
Totally. That was something that I had like trouble with. I don't know why, but so obviously like I set everything to Eastern time zone. But for the participants who like I have met with and have done the study with, everyone's been from like the West, like different time zones, and had that because I think we had that miscommunication for a bit, didn't we?
Yes.
Like zones? Yeah. And I was like, okay, it's like what works best for you, honestly. Like I'm willing to accommodate for anything.
Yeah. No, it gets a little bit trippy, you know? So I've had people even just for the podcast, like, God, this was like one of the first few people I had on the show, but his name's Matt and he's gene positive, but he lives in Africa. Now, if you ask me what part of Africa, I will probably not remember, but he's from Africa. So our time difference was gigantic. So trying to put together something like that was much more complicated. So yeah, it was kind of like, I think it was one of those, I did a really early morning and he did a really like late afternoon. But yeah, oh my gosh, that makes me so happy that they're willing to help you. And that's one of the things that I aspire to be more like, just because champions, like when we always have, like most nonprofits do, probably even most businesses, but businesses don't always put out their actual like profits every year, depending on if they're private or not. But we always put out an annual report. And so it's kind of cool because it gives me an opportunity to reflect on how we did the previous year. But with that being said, because we're still like small and we're just board driven and sometimes some volunteers, it can take a while for us to like, you know, especially me, because I feel like I probably get the vast majority of the emails, to be consistent with them. Because yeah, I'm like, oh man, like someone one time was on our website and we have a little, it's like one of the chat functions, but you're leaving a message for us to get back to. And I had someone who was just blowing it up because she didn't understand that like it wasn't someone live talking to the person. So thankfully we were able to address what she was concerned about. And she was like panicking about something, so I totally understood. But I was like, oh man. So it just makes me happy that, you know, super efficient. You got all that you needed. That's awesome.
It was really nice to see that like they were so like receptive and like excited that I was doing research. And they were like, of course, we'll do like anything we can to get the word out there. And it was nice. Very supportive.
Now, because I know you and I have talked before, but just for everyone who's going to be listening to this, how did you end up choosing your major that you're studying? And how does Huntington's fall into your life? Because we know that your cousin has juvenile Huntington's.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just start a little about like my like HD in my family. So my uncle passed away of HD when I was really young. He was probably around like 45. Yeah. So
still super young.
Yeah, so young. But at that time I didn't really fully understand the significance of Huntington's or even like the role it would play like later in my life, that being like the genetic component with my cousin. So my cousin is 29, so we're pretty close in age. And he tested positive when he was 19. And I remember that's when I really started to like understand, and when I'd overhear like conversations on the phone with my mom and my aunt. It's like when I really started to pay attention, because I had listened to an episode of yours where you and someone talked about the like struggle of deciding whether you want to get tested or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of when like I started to realize like, oh, this is happening. And so he tested positive at 19 and he's 29. And he lives in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Oh,
so
okay.
Super like close. But
Yeah.
like we see each other like you would cousins, like we see them at holidays, family things.
Yep.
Every so often. So it was interesting to see that like whenever we would see them, you really saw the disease progression, because he has juvenile Huntington's disease.
Yep.
And so like if I saw him like every Christmas or like every few years, you would really see that progression starting. And I think like from then I knew that I wanted to be involved and I wanted to like be in healthcare in some way and really work and advocate for individuals with Huntington's disease.
Mm-hmm.
And during my undergrad studies at Penn State, I was actually a kinesiology major, so I was going more the PT route
Mm-hmm.
because I thought that that was what I wanted to do. And then randomly, I went to school with my brother at Penn State, and he was like, take this class with me. It's a communication sciences and disorders class. He was like, take this with me. I actually heard he was like, I heard it's an easy class. Let's take it together. And like, let's just have fun and be in a class together. Like,
yeah,
we'll cheat on exams or something. So we go into this class, and I realized like I'm super interested in it, because a big part of Huntington's for me would be advocacy. And then I thought like, what better way to advocate for the disease than working with individuals and helping them preserve their communication abilities to be able to advocate for themselves. So that was really a big switch for me, and I realized that I wanted to go into speech pathology. So, which leads me to now. I'm at Northeastern University in Boston, pursuing a graduate master's degree in speech pathology. And I thought that I would even just say a little bit about what speech pathology is.
Oh no, please do.
Because I think sometimes, like, with therapists, like, they can all get kind of lumped together, but everyone does play, like, their individual role.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of Huntington's, like, I do work on interdisciplinary teams with, like, PT, OT, social workers, like, neurologists, etc. And we like to think about it as, like, a whole body approach, kind of. So, like, for PT, it would be from your feet to your hips, and that's working on, like, your lower body movement, strengthening your leg muscles for walking, things like that. From your hips to your shoulders would then be OT. So that's upper body movements, your, like, activities of daily life. So that's, like, grooming, upper body dressing, arm strength. And then speech pathology is really from your neck to the top of your head. So we work on, like, eating and swallowing. We'll work on strategies and therapies to, like, strengthen those, like, muscles of swallowing. And we would also be the, like, professionals to recommend diet changes, like, when that comes in the disease process, whether that be, like, thickening of liquids or just, like, diet modifications to make eating and swallowing, like, a safe, like, experience.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's definitely, like, a big concern as the progression goes on. So that's, like, a really important thing that we do in terms of, like, degenerative diseases. Then we also have the, like, cognitive communication component. So that would be, like, working on things like memory tasks or attention, problem solving, things like that. And we can also work on voice or, like, motor speech disorders. So as disease progression with all degenerative diseases, often, like, vocal quality decreases a bit. So whether that just be, like, enunciation, like articulation, kind of get that like mumbling, or like postural support. So there's not enough breath support to really like help with that vocal quality. So we'll work with individuals on things like that. And yeah, so that's like a little bit about speech pathology. Obviously, it's a small section of it, but
it's an overview.
Yeah. But in terms of like HD, that's typically what I would do when working with individuals with like a progressive disease, would be focusing on that eating and swallowing, cognitive communication, and voice.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you broke that down, just because, and I've only had experience watching my sister who had juvenile Huntington's go through that. Now, my dad and my grandfather are both still alive, and they, as far as I know, I mean, I don't live with them. I don't live with my dad like I used to growing up. As far as I know, neither one of them are anywhere close to that. And I've also noticed that, and you can jump in if I'm off base here, but juvenile, I see it a lot, especially kind of like, I don't even want to say later on. Sometimes it's like with Bree. Oh God, I guess it was technically later on because we started noticing symptoms at like 7 or 8, but then she wasn't diagnosed till she was 11. And then it was the year she turned 12 was the year I moved home. And that, like, at end of the year, right before she turned 13, was when she got a feeding tube. So I guess you could say that was not technically a slow, or it wasn't like right away, because she had years that we just didn't know what was going on. Yeah. But the fact that the moment she was diagnosed, within like 12 months, she was already getting a feeding tube and having those really tough conversations. And so I hear a lot about that with JHD, but with regular Huntington's, I feel like it kind of depends on the circumstances, just because I do know people who with regular Huntington's who have had loved ones who've received a feeding tube or gotten that, bad. But at this point, I mean, I hope my dad doesn't need that, but he's nowhere close to that right now.
Yeah. I think like a big risk factor in degenerative diseases would be because we know like with Huntington's, there's the motor component and then there's cognitive components. And typically with disease progression, we see like motoric features like decrease first. But when that cognitive feature gets involved, that's when we see like a greater risk for like aspiration pneumonia, which is like a big thing in degenerative diseases. So it's interesting, like as a speech pathologist, if it's early on in the disease process, you could take a restorative therapy approach. So that would be like really building those muscles and like trying to get them like super strong, so that as disease progression happens, it would like maintain for a longer amount of time. So like it's hard because especially with swallowing, like they're muscles that we can't see. Yes. So it's tricky to explain, but like if we really strengthen them as the like deterioration happens, it'll just take a long time. So we'll like be able to maintain those functions for longer. But later on in the disease process, we would typically do like compensatory strategies for swallowing, whether that be like teaching individuals and caregivers to like eliminate external like distractors. So like don't watch TV when you eat, or like don't talk when you eat.
I'm guilty of
so much. I can sometimes eat an entire meal watching TV and then not realize that I ate the meal.
Okay, yeah, growing up. Now, for a while, when my dad wasn't progressed and we didn't know about Huntington's at this point, he was still going and working his job and then coming home, we would typically have like a family dinner at the table and stuff. But then it got to the point where, it wasn't always like that anymore. But especially at my mom's house, it was always just pretty like, just chill. We had a table and sometimes we'd use it, but most of the time it'd be like, we'd eat as a family in the living room. And so those are habits that like I still have today, and boyfriend still has, because I don't know, that's just how we are. So we have a table that sits in front of our couch and we eat while we watch TV. It's pretty bad, but I'm just laughing. So I'm like, yeah, I'm guilty. I do that probably every time I eat.
No, totally. I think, honestly, like, it's a big deal in my house if we all sit down at the kitchen table.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, I mean, I hate to say it because it makes me kind of sad when I say this. Kind of like the whole phone thing, just distracting us from each other. But we're all guilty of it, is the fact that, like, we're just so dang busy in America. And regardless of how old you are, like, what facet of life you're in, whether you're a college student still or working adult, caregiver, you know, any of the above, it's like sometimes you just don't have time to sit down.
Yeah, exactly. I think, like, for Huntington's, those are kind of things that we would recommend for, like, making sure that you're sitting up straight and eating, and then sitting up for at least, like, 45 minutes after. So, like, gravity really helps with that, like, digestion process. But so that's, like, a main reason, like, being a speech pathologist and working with eating and swallowing a lot is, like, a main reason why that's, like, a big component in my research.
Yeah. Well, so this is kind of intriguing me because I feel like a lot of times when people go into just anything that has to do with, I don't even know if medicine's the right word, but being some type of, like, expert or doctor, stuff like Huntington's, even with neurologists, sometimes doesn't really get brought up, or it's just kind of, like, addressed and then they move on to the next chapter unless if they're a specialist going into it. So with yours being speech pathology, was that something that was just already being addressed up front in your classes?
No.
No?
So,
okay.
There's always a big emphasis on ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia.
Ironic, right?
Us in the community obviously know that Huntington's is a combination of all of those things.
Yep.
So where is the advocacy? Where is the education on it?
Oh, okay.
And
that makes me sad.
I think that, but I will say that doing this thesis has really felt rewarding in a sense where I have the opportunity to educate my classmates who are going to be future clinicians.
Yeah.
And my professors who are, like, on my board, like my mentors, advisors for this thesis have now started to, like, introduce HD into the conversation.
Good.
I think because they know that otherwise I would say something. But
that's good though.
Now, there's a slide for it in our PowerPoints. Or I had an exam the other day, and one of the answers, it was on motor speech disorders, and it was talking about, like, hyperkinesia and how that's, like, a characteristic, and, like, what disease? I was like, bang, Huntington's.
You don't have to ask me twice.
Yeah, I was like, okay, aced the exam.
Yes.
But it was really great to see that and see, like, how even just, like, within Northeastern, like, they've really, like, started to introduce HD into the conversation along with Parkinson's, ALS. Because even as I've talked to classmates, a lot of people have. So in Boston, there's Mass General, Huntington's Disease Center of Excellence, and Beth Israel, who I've worked with on the interdisciplinary team there at the Center of Excellence. And so a lot of my classmates actually, like, have had their first experience, like, working with individuals with Huntington's. And even when they experience it, they find me and come up to me and they're like, I don't know why we don't talk about this more.
Yeah.
This is not something I've ever seen. And, like, they didn't know, like, necessarily, like, the right approach to therapy to take with them.
Yeah.
And it's sad, but it's also nice because I'm seeing, like, slow progression happen.
Right. And they're coming back to you and saying, oh, now because I've seen it. Because a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this, like, when I keep forgetting that there's a time when, you know, most of us don't know about Huntington's, or even if people have it in their family growing up, you know, I don't know. I didn't know I had it in my family growing up, so I can't necessarily speak for those people. But for most of us, there's a moment where the light switch goes off that Huntington's is in your family, and you're starting to see what that looks like and what that means. But that being said, it's probably the same thing in medicine. If you're trying to talk about it, or in any type of, you know, specialty, and people, you know, the textbook apparently it's probably not even he's probably not even in the textbook. But a textbook, a class can only go so far. So it's the moments where they're able to actually go and be with patients who are dealing with this that they can understand why it's significant that we include Huntington's in the conversation.
Yeah. I agree. I think that I'm happy that like in Boston, I feel like I'm in this like hub where like I can really work with this population.
Mm-hmm.
Always what I've wanted to do. Like speech pathology it can go in so many different ways. Like the career, you can go like school, you can go adult medical,
yeah.
and you can specialize in these little like niches. And I love being here. I've loved working with the team at Beth Israel at the Center of Excellence. Like it's just awesome to like see representation here and see like people traveling from all over to come here. Like when we meet patients and I'm like, where are you from? And they're like, Arizona. I'm like, how did you get here? But it's awesome, like them coming from all over because they know like this is such a great like place and there's such good support and doctors here.
That is amazing. And to feel and know that you are a part of that movement has to just be really rewarding for you.
Yeah. So when I originally reached out to Dr. Sam Frank at Beth Israel, and I was like, I'm a grad student, speech pathology, and I'm like super interested in Huntington's. I'm writing a thesis, like research. I was wondering if like I could come in and shadow. And it was so funny. Everyone was kind of like, how did you hear about this? Like, why?
About
like,
Huntington's?
Yeah, like he was, because it's like, so, like he was like, you definitely have a family connection. Because otherwise, like, how did, like,
which is sad.
This specific thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they were thinking, if you would have called up or emailed them with any other specification except for Huntington's, they would have been like, oh yeah, sure, come on over. But Huntington's, hold on. Which, I mean, it is a family disease, unfortunately. Yeah. But that still makes me sad. But they welcomed you with open arms. They're happy to have you.
Totally. They're so nice. They're so smart. I love learning from them. And being like a part of the interdisciplinary team is like so nice because we do like co-treatments with PT and OT and the neurologist. So it's like all of us in there with one patient working together, but on different things. And it's so great to see. Like I've seen a lot of like patients come in and out and it's amazing.
It's got to give you, I mean, it might be hard just because of the family connection to see similarities to people who you love or have loved who have gone through Huntington's. But it has to also be just really, significant to you that every single day, like when you get to go over to the Center of Excellence, that you get to meet with people and know that you made a difference.
Yeah. And I think it is unfortunate that it's the family connection that gets you there, but it gives you an emotional component that maybe other people won't have. And I think taking that in my approach to therapy, especially with this population, has been so helpful because while I can't say that I like completely know what they're going through, I feel like in terms of just seeing another therapist, like I understand more.
Yes. No, that's really powerful just because, if you're going through something as awful as Huntington's, and a lot of us know what it's like, whether it's HD or especially JHD. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, I know only certain people will be able to see this shirt if and when I post the video.
It's dirty. It's in my laundry basket. I was like ruffling through it this morning.
What shirt do you have?
Mine's just my Team Hope shirt.
Oh, okay. Yeah. See, the way that I haven't figured out how to like crop my new camera, so I just have to like move my Mac in weird ways. Yeah. But there's a mom and daughter. Their names are London and Autumn Tabor. And they have like a super viral TikTok account. They've got like 150,000 people on there. And I've had them on the podcast a couple times. They came to Michigan in 2021 for our benefit concert. And Autumn, her daughter, who right now, she'll be 17 next month. Because her and my sister would have been a month apart. Or no, this month. It's March. Her birthday's the day before mine. How cute is that? So she'll be 17. But they advocate for juvenile Huntington. So they have these shirts that they make, and they made me one when they came to Michigan because Autumn was our champion for HD that year. So they made me this, it's a black one, and it has orange specks on it, and it says Champions for HD, and it's just, I love it. So now they have a whole Etsy shop, and they have ones like JHD Advocate, I love someone with HD and blue, so I bought like 3 of them, and I love them so much. But yeah, I try my best to.
I'm definitely gonna check that out.
Oh my gosh, you should. I love their stuff so much, and to know that like they're homemade, they make them at their house together. Yeah. And it's super sweet. I don't even remember why I got on that tangent. Something about JHD. Oh, I think it was because we were talking about how difficult it is and people don't understand. And we actually, there's a nonprofit called Help for HD, and they set up, it was like a year in the making, but last month they had us, a select amount of us go on a virtual hearing testimony call with the FDA because JHD patients are never, there's no trials because of the fact that, yes, there's less JHD patients than Huntington's, and there can be a difference in their symptoms and their progression, obviously. But the big thing is, which has always driven me mad, even with me, and I don't have any onset of Huntington's yet, but there have been times where I wanted to do studies, and now I'm about to be 26, but back then they'd be like, A, you're not 25, so your brain's not developed, and B, you're not symptomatic enough, which that second one, I'm like, okay, like, that's a blessing. But the other one, I'm like, okay, come on. But with juvenile Huntington's, that's typically what they assert themselves in. They're like, no, we don't want to mess with minors, and they're not developed. And we're all over here in the community going, it's a progressive brain disease. Most of them aren't, their brains aren't ever fully going to develop. Some of them, like my sister, didn't even make it until 25. So why are you leaving them out, just to hang by themselves? Like, so I didn't actually talk. I was just there for like emotional support because they had moms of JHD children, all who gave testimonies. I was bawling like the whole time. I had my Zoom camera off, but I was like wiping up tears because it was very emotional. But it's just beautiful that, you're playing a role in educating people, because there's so many people who feel like they have to fend for themselves, even with professionals, which is probably like one of the most terrifying things about HD or JHD is like you have to tell the professionals what is going on.
I completely agree. And I think that is scary. Like, to go in and be like, I'm seeing this professional who's supposed to help me, but they don't even know what this is. Like, and I'm having to educate them on what's going on with me. And I think that, I don't know, like, I do agree. And I think that it's been really nice to like build those connections when I'm in there, or at least like even with patients, like builds good rapport with them. Like, it puts them at ease knowing that like, and the interdisciplinary team there, everyone does have experience with it. So it is nice. And I think like you can really see like the patients are so trusting of like these doctors and everyone who works with them, because they're like, they get it. And that's why they do travel like these far lengths to get it. Because it's like, I'm seeing people who actually understand like what's going on.
Which is so empowering, and at the same time, it's so heartbreaking that there's not enough of those types of facilities and professionals, and understanding that you can get that, across the country. You have to really limit yourself to certain places. But you get to be one of those places, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely nice. And I think that was like a big springboard for my research, honestly, because part of like the reason that I wanted to do it, like I had said before, was when people ask me about it, I'm able to educate like my classmates who are going to be professionals, like working in this population. But also just like, I think it's so important to like emphasize research, because like you mentioned, Parkinson's, ALS, and Alzheimer's are just like such big things, and they have so much research and so much funding. and I want HD to get on that level, but it does start at the level of research and like getting involved in research, because it really like has that snowball effect where like I hope that someone reads my research and even critiques it, and they're like, well, why did she just take this approach? Like, why didn't she think of it in this way? And then it prompts them to start their own research study. Yeah. And then from there, we get more research, more funding, more advocacy, then more research, more funding, more advocacy. And then it really has that snowball effect where it starts going, and then hopefully HD can get somewhere on the same playing field as other diseases.
I'd love for you to do a deep dive into what you're doing for your study.
Yeah, so my thesis is a comparison of patient self-report and caregiver report on characteristics of Huntington's. So specifically, because of speech pathology, I'll be looking at eating and swallowing status and quality of life. And so the procedures of the study are that there's 2 participants for like each pair. So one would be an individual with Huntington's or positive gene diagnosis, and the second is a caregiver. The caregiver doesn't necessarily have to be a primary caregiver, but just someone who is around them enough to be able to speak to their eating and swallowing status and quality of life. So the study has 2 short questionnaires, one being an eating and swallowing status questionnaire, and then the other is a quality of life measure. And this one's actually really nice because it's a Huntington's disease specific quality of life measure, which is nice to see that there's like actually a standardized measure specifically for Huntington's. So the study would have the individual with HD complete these questionnaires just like you would a normal questionnaire, so like on the severity and prevalence that these do or don't play in your life. And then afterwards, a caregiver would complete modified versions of these questionnaires on their perception of the individual. So it's interesting in this approach because a lot of the times when we think of caregiver questionnaires, it's typically on caregiver burden, which is so extremely important. But this is kind of taking a different approach to caregivers' perception of the person that they care for. So with this data, like we're really looking for trends and like analyzing areas of significant agreement or disagreement between the individual and caregiver. And from like a clinical standpoint, helps us even just ask the question like, would access to this type of information affect how we approach therapy? I spoke at a support group last week, and I was saying, like, I don't know everyone's experience with therapy or receiving services, but I think we can all agree, or at least acknowledge the dumpster fire that is working with insurance, because it is a miserable experience.
Yes.
And there's often a cap on the amount of, like, sessions that we're allowed to have. Especially with speech pathology, I think we're typically the first to go, and then like PT and OT will stay a little longer.
Probably because they're specialties, not necessities, which is such garbage because no 2 people are exactly the same. So how can you tell someone with Huntington's or another type of disease that needs this that, oh, that's not a necessity? What?
Exactly. And I think what's really nice about these questionnaires too is, especially the quality of life measure, it lets you know what's important to the individual and to the caregiver, because if they're rating these as a more severe problem or it has a more severe impact on their quality of life, that means that it's important to them. So it's kind of like if we take this information, for one, as a clinician, you can like maximize the time and quality of therapy if we're not getting as many sessions as we would like. So you don't have to spend like 1 or 2 sessions kind of getting that baseline, or even if you're 1 or 2 sessions in and you realize, oh, these 2 people are not on the same page. Like they need to get, like we need to either approach it as like counseling, getting these 2 like to recognize that this is a problem area, or is it like patient or client not being aware of their deficits, where like if their caregiver rated them as super high in one area and they self-reported as no problem, okay, is there a lack of awareness that this is a problem?
Right.
And then we address it from there. So it's nice that from like the very first session, you can look over this information, decide if there's areas of disagreement that we want to resolve, or what's important to them. And maybe if they agree on like problem areas and things that are important to them, maybe we just target those depending on like where we are in the disease process. And like, so clinicians can use subjective and objective measures from this data to like tailor their therapy.
Which is just, it's incredible. It's incredible. You should be so excited and so proud of yourself.
I am so happy to do this research. I think like a big part of me wanting to come on the podcast and stuff too is to talk about it, but also to talk about how important it is for like people to get involved in it.
Yeah.
I know that our community's small but mighty. Small, super mighty.
Small but mighty. Yeah.
And everyone has been really receptive, but having a good outcome in this study would be so helpful, because in terms of that snowball effect that I had mentioned before with like doing more research, if people read my research and see that I had a good amount of participants, it's just another factor that could like help prompt someone to do research.
Yeah.
Because they know they're going to have the support, they're going to have the participants. So as much as I can't understand what it's like to be like an individual with HD or a primary caregiver, because there's so many things going on, I can only imagine that participating in research is the last thing on your mind. But it's just so important. And for this study especially, I wanted to emphasize that it's like a 20-minute phone call.
Oh, I can vouch for Paige here. We did it, and I think you and I were on the phone for like 5 to 10 minutes. Like mine was really quick. And of course, I'm a little bit different because I don't have any symptoms. But still, I mean, it was very to the point, but also like tailored to anyone's needs, despite where they're at with the disease. So super easy. I loved it. And then even my boyfriend didn't really seem like he went in another room when you called the second time. So he went in the basement, and then he came back up, and I was like, "Oh, you're done?" He goes, "Yeah." So yeah.
I think that's nice too. Like something that I emphasize on the call, like if depending on the individual and the support that they would need, if they need help from a caregiver to answer questions on the questionnaire, then they can be together. And typically we'll be on like a call, so I would monitor that. But if people could be in different rooms, that's preferred, because you want these like results and answers to be honest,
truthful.
Like, So
you don't want to
bias,
especially because sometimes like people who have the disease and are progressed are maybe in denial about their progression, like my dad a lot of the time. Or vice versa, you know, maybe the caregiver does not want to disclose all of the issues that are happening because they don't want the person with the disease to feel bad about themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. And when I mention like areas of agreement and disagreement, it's not like a bad thing. Honestly, when there are like significant disagreements, it's like good for this data, because now I get to interpret it and start a conversation in this way. Like, why is it different? Who's rating things as more severe as the other? And maybe why is this? Like I had mentioned before, is it maybe that they need to have a conversation? Or is it like someone's just not like articulating their feelings with the other? So in terms of like eating and swallowing, you could have difficulty, but maybe not to the point where you feel like you have to tell someone. Yeah, when I do swallow, like things are feeling a little weird or something. So this data is really nice because it's like, oh, this is a problem. Or maybe it's questions that they didn't think to ask themselves or talk about, that like when I ask questions on eating and swallowing, they're like, oh, that actually is true. Like I do feel that sometimes.
Yeah.
And then it's nice because it just gets people aware. And there's so many like clinical implications and like different directions that you can interpret the data. So it's nice because this research is kind of just that foundational piece for it to potentially go in so many directions.
Yeah. So how can people get involved? And you know that we'll post anything and everything that you need.
Yeah. So I do have a flyer that I'll send to you.
Perfect.
And I think it's posted on the like surveys and blogs at HGSA on the website.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'll send you the link to the calendar.
Is it Calendly that you have? It's a little bit of a tongue twister. Yeah. Okay.
Website.
Yeah.
Because that's like really, like we were talking about, really helpful for people to decide like time and day that works for them. I would love any and all participation, so I'm willing to make any accommodations that anyone needs to make it like a quick and easy process for everyone. So
you said that's actually a great idea, if I heard you right. HGSA has a part of their website where you can participate in surveys and... okay. Well, you know what? We have a portion of our website that's get involved, and typically it's just like come on the podcast or like be a volunteer, but that would be a nice thing to add to that section of the website.
Yeah, because it's like a little blurb about what it is, and then it's like, if you want to participate, click here. And then click there.
Yeah, oh yeah. And I love having stuff like that available just because, I mean, obviously you want people to come on a website and be able to understand like what your nonprofit's doing and see testimonies, but for me at least, like, you know, starting the nonprofit was my way of like getting involved and feeling good about something. So I know that for a lot of other people who are in the same position, they want to do something, which thank God, like that gets us a lot of people who want to come on the podcast or volunteer, but having an opportunity to do something like, you know, your study is another great opportunity. So yeah, I'm actually going to like write that in my little planner. I'm still lame. I use my phone for a lot of stuff. Like if I didn't have my Siri reminders, I would be non-existent as a person, but I still use a planner. I still
like a million notes.
Yes. I don't know. There's just something different about like, I have the worst handwriting, but writing it down just like helps me.
What a good memory strategy.
It is. It really is. Like when I was still in college, I had such on a tangent, but I had a lot of professors which I get it, but at the same time I was like, come on, we paid for these laptops, but they would be like, no, like if you take notes in my class, it has to be handwritten. So there were a lot of times where I'd do handwritten notes and then I would like then type it up into a Google Drive to make sure that I had it everywhere, which I guess for like memory sake, that's probably good. But like in the meantime, I was like, oh my gosh.
I know. It's tedious, but
it really is.
Did you do well?
Yeah, well, so...
Okay, there we go.
I would have taken my notes handwritten anyway. It was just that I liked to have, like, an overview on my notes, like, digitally, just so... Because my handwriting is not great, so I typically can understand it, but every now and then I'd look back and be like, what did I write there? Like, what was that? My mom...
Notes in, like, code. I'm like, what was I trying to say here?
Oh, honestly, my mom, I don't know if she uses it anymore or what it was called, but my mom, she got her master's. She was a teacher, and now she's a vice principal. So she's always been in, like, the education scene. Mm-hmm. But at one point, she had, and I don't know, this might have been when she was still teaching English, but she would write stuff down on some kind of, like, pad, and then it would turn it into text and upload it to the computer. Oh. I was like, what? I don't remember what it was called, but I'm always like, that probably would have. There's so many things I would do differently if I was back in school right now, just like with note taking and all of those things. But I also really don't think I could mentally go back to school. So
the way that I like graduate in May, fingers crossed.
Oh, okay. I was gonna ask you what year you're in. So you're almost done.
I graduate in May.
Oh my gosh.
And I just went like from undergrad straight to grad school because I thought I wouldn't be able, like personally, I don't think I would be able to go back to school. So I was like, I'm in the mindset, let's
right for it. Yeah, I get that.
and I'm exhausted. Like, I think I'm ready to graduate, be a working professional. So I'm ready.
See, everyone's so different. I don't know if I could have like lumped it together if I ever did get a master's. Part of me feels like I would have. Some people do breaks and then go back, but I mean, I've been out of college for 4 years now, so it's like
now it's like, could you imagine? Like, I was telling some of my roommates, like,
no.
I live with people who are in the program with me, but one of my other roommates is just working, and I'll tell her sometimes, I'm like, imagine sitting down and taking a Scantron exam right now. And she's like, no, I could never.
Now, I've heard this, and it probably depends on where you go to school and what program you study, but in a master's, do you even really do like Scantrons, or is it more just like doing...
I've done Scantrons. Yeah.
What?
It's crazy.
See, the funny thing is, again, I've never gotten my master's, but my senior year of college, when I was in my capstone class, I actually appreciated it because we had no multiple choice. All of our tests were done, they were open-ended questions that we'd have to respond to. But she would give you like partial points if she could see the point you were trying to make and you just didn't quite get there. Where with a Scantron, it's like you either get it wrong or right.
Well, you're wrong,
so I actually found I did much better than, not that I was a bad student, like I had a good GPA and everything, and in high school it was all frickin' Scantrons. But I really liked that last year of school when, at least in my major, I was not taking like Scantrons.
Yeah. Well, we do this past week. I didn't do them because I'm writing this thesis, but we do like comprehensive exams. So it's kind of just like on everything you've learned, and it's like an oral defense.
Okay.
Professor, and that's really nice because you can go to like get your master's or go on to like work in healthcare.
Yeah.
And you can be like academically very like smart, good at taking, like a good test taker. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter. Like, how are you applying this when you go into the field? Like, I could do great on a multiple choice exam, but when I'm in a hospital and I'm meeting people, like that, like how I respond to things, how I interact there is far more important than what I got.
We could go on for hours about how I feel about all that. Yeah. Nope, I'm in the same boat. I've always been that way, especially when it comes to like, and my mom even knows it's a game and she's in education, but when it comes to like, when I was in school, we took ACT. Now they take the SAT. That's like the standardized one. But I have always had such a gripe with the whole premise of a standardized test. Because, I mean, sure, I guess if you want me to play devil's advocate, you need some way to like level it out forever. But the problem is no one's the same, and no one's going to go to the same major. I can tell you what, I didn't use nothing from the ACT in my college career. I didn't use science. I didn't use math because I was originally like a music business major at Belmont. Then when my family got diagnosed, I moved home and I went locally to a university and I studied public relations. Well, I'm going to tell you what, in the School of Communications, we don't really use math. We don't really use science. Like, I was like, I don't need any of this. I don't even know how to do, like, I could do maybe basic algebra, but it's like, I don't even know what the Pythagorean theorem and stuff like that. Like, I don't use any of that stuff. And yet you're going to determine my college acceptance and scholarship. Oh, that drove me nuts the first 2 years I was away for school. I wasn't eligible for scholarships from the university because of my ACT score. But when I got to Belmont, my GPA was outstanding and was sometimes better than kids who came in and just got scholarship because of their ACTs. But I was like, how? And my sister, who, it's my I always say this just for like, when I'm talking about HD, I feel like I have to. My stepsister, so she has no relation to the HD side of my family, but she's a nurse, and she got so mad before she had graduated, but it was like a year in between her graduation and becoming a nurse. She was already working, but to remain a nurse, I have to take some kind of like test. I don't know what it's called, but it's some kind of standardized test that, like, I know you got to do stuff like that for being like a lawyer and doing your CPA, all that kind of stuff. But she told me flat out, she was like, this exam is literally nothing like what I do on a day-to-day basis. And most of my coworkers told me that, like, oh yeah, like that test sucks. It doesn't have anything to do with like your day to day, but you have to pass it. So like just study to the test. And I'm like, why? And she had to pay for it. I'm like, why are you paying to study to a test that doesn't actually have to do with what you do on the hospital floor? Like, anyway. Anyway.
And things are just so situational too. Like,
yes.
there are definitely things like, because I think I have just such an interest in working with like degenerative diseases and adult like medical, but the other half of like a speech language pathologist is in school. But I just like don't think the kid route is for me. But like I have to like take these classes and like pass exams on these things, and it's like I don't see myself ever being in that setting, but I know everything about it.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's a different world. It's a different world when you're in school. But you graduate soon. So what would be, I know you said you weren't sure if you wanted to stay in Boston long term, but what would be your dream job with your degree if you could go anywhere?
So it would be working at getting a full-time job at Beth Israel.
So you would stay if you got a full-time job?
Yeah. So as a speech pathologist, I'll graduate with my master's, and then I have to do a clinical fellowship for 9 months.
Well, that's not bad.
Yeah. And so I'm applying for positions currently. And I'm kind of applying all over too, because 9 months, I kind of think of it like, oh, that would be a nice set time where like I can go somewhere new and like experience things.
That's true. And then you know that. So would you be able to apply for your full-time job before you start this 9 months, or would it have to be after that?
It would be after, because then after this fellowship, then I'll be like a fully certified clinician.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I like have a supervisor for the next 9 months, but like you gradually like take over their caseload, and then they just like check in on you and have that like mentorship. But yeah, so that's what I'm currently doing, is just looking around. I'd love to stay in Boston just because of like working with Huntington's is so important to me, and I love the environment here.
Yes.
Like, and how there's so much support here. I've gone on the HD like Team Hope walks here. Like it's just, I like the community here.
Yes.
And it's talked about, and it's nice because Boston's such like a nice medical hub. Like there's so many amazing hospitals.
Yeah.
So yeah, I prefer to stay here, but
that's a good idea though. Like maybe take 9 months to just venture out of your comfort zone, and then know that like, okay, after 9 months, I'm going to go. Cause yeah, I mean, if I had that opportunity, I would totally do that. Just take a leap, go somewhere else, and knowing that it has like a beginning and an end would probably make the anxiety like less than it would be if you were just, I'm just gonna wing it.
Because I think I'm just like an East Coast person.
That's fair.
So, but I think like having that set time would be nice to like experience something new and then come back, because I feel like I'll eventually like settle.
Well, shoot, I mean, if you apply everywhere that you can think of and get your application in at, it's just gonna fall into like God's hands and wherever the universe places you. And that's, trust me, I'm still trying to, as a I have gotten more and more religious post diagnoses and losing my sister. But there's still a lot of times, though, when I'm at my Sunday morning Bible studies, we're like, okay, Shelby, so are you learning to, like, let go and trust the process? And I'm like, no. But
definitely sometimes, especially, like, even in this process, like, dealing with rejection.
Yeah.
I remind myself, and I'm religious also, and I am always like, okay, it's a plan. And then I'm like, wait, how many times am I going to say this? Like, where? Come on.
I fully do believe it, even if I'm very open with people. I'm like, I believe in the plan. I'm just not always like myself mentally like equipped or on board.
Where are you going with this?
Yeah. I mean, it is nice when sometimes it finally does come to like a resolution, you know, like the year that my dad and my sister got diagnosed, I started that testing process, and then I waited to come back home from Belmont because my mom was like, hell no, I'm not going to let you get a test and go be by yourself 500 miles away, which I understood. So, but then I got diagnosed and I moved back home. But that year, and actually I'm like super geeked because I wrote a chapter about it in this book.
I saw that. Okay.
So cool. Yeah.
Explain more to me.
Okay, so I got approached by, her name is Erin Patterson, almost exactly a year ago, and she said, hey, we're going to put together a book with Huntington's disease heroes. I don't even know if it had that title at that point, but the premise was HD heroes. It was going to be 20. I think it ended up being about 25 of us that wrote chapters. And so she said, you know, we want people from all different backgrounds with HD. So that's like gene positive, gene negative, because a lot of times people don't even think about like gene negative affects you just as much. Caregiver, professional, like anyone. And so she reached out to people that she had in mind. There was a fundraiser goal for each individual to raise to help with like the publishing and distribution. And half of the proceeds is going back to HDYO, which is another HD nonprofit. So that was probably the most stressful part for me. But I got that done. And so we had to take a portion of our lives with Huntington's and put it into a chapter, which so much harder than I ever could have imagined. And this is coming from someone who like has always had a life goal, even prior to Huntington's, of like writing like a memoir or something. Yeah. And I'm like, dear God, how am I ever going to do that? Because I think mine was like 8 pages and it was 9 months of just like, okay, I want this rough draft back by this date, and then I'm going to send you edits, and just down to like nitty gritty things. Like, okay, could you tell me more about like what you were feeling in this moment? I'm like, well, I was feeling like garbage. Like, I don't know what more you want me to say. And so I'm having to like dig real deep and envisioning myself back in that moment, because I talked about the moment that I found out about my dad and sister. Well, actually my sister was the day I moved in to my dorm my sophomore year. And then like how it just all went to hell afterwards, and how I started the testing process and all of the dark things that happened in between. And so she just wanted people to like be honest, because a lot of us, when even mine was 6 years ago now, almost, as in May, I'll be 6 years diagnosed. But even 6 years ago, there was not as much out there as there is now. So that's why, like, when I started Champions, I was like, okay, like, I'm going to put a YouTube video out there talking about my story. We'll start a podcast, just because it was all very, like, clinical type stuff when I'd go on to YouTube or to Google. It was just, here's what it is. There was no anecdotal, like, oversight. It was just clinical. So she wanted that. She was like, I want something worldwide. So we had 25 people from all over the world who wrote a chapter. And so I talk about my diagnosis and Bree's and losing her. So mine's called Finding My Inner Champion, because, you know, everything revolves around Rocket for me. But that's actually, like, probably what I would somewhat title, like, a memoir at some point anyway, if I ever get to that, because God. But yeah, so we just got it. It came out officially on Rare Disease Day, but I bought it, like, the week prior. It's on Amazon. So, yeah, it's crazy that... But she wanted it as a resource, so that when people find out, they can get the book, and it's not just one perspective, it's 25 perspectives.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I even like what you said, like, even being negative.
Mm-hmm.
That's also something I feel that's not talked about a lot. It's like, to go through, like, what is it like to go through the testing process and be gene negative, and just, like, the emotional toll that even takes.
Yes, one of the first women I had on here back in 2020, her name's Ashley, and she's married, she has 2 kids, but her mom actually just recently passed away, now that I think about it, but her mom had HD. Super, like, I had a lot of toxic trauma from HD in my childhood, but not that anyone's trauma is worse than others, but, like, her and a few other people have made me really reflect on the type of abuse my dad did, because, like, it would be like, I don't even want to say this was necessarily her mom, but there were 3 different women I talked to on the show, and all 3 of them, it was their moms who had it, and their moms were, like, super violent, like, running with kitchen knives, trying to and I was like, dude, my dad, like, we had the cops at my house all the time, because my dad and my stepmom would, like, beat each other up. My dad was very verbally, they both had their own issues. But I was like, dear God, no one ever took a kitchen knife to someone else that I know. Just extreme versions. So going through this, you still have siblings who are at risk, but she went through the process, got tested negative, which of course is great. She has 2 kids, but she had a lot of just guilt for it still. So she came on and talked about it. And I was like, I'm so glad you talked about this, because I just feel like people assume oh, you should be happy you're gene negative, which, yeah, I mean, that's a blessing. But at the same time, that doesn't take away the fact that you're still fully saturated in HD and the people around you who have it. You don't just get a free ride out.
Exactly. And then, even if there's, multiple siblings and stuff, it's okay, I don't, what does that mean for them? It's not over.
No. Oh, my gosh. I know this is going to sound really, not really even bad, just kind of weird to think about. But when I went through my testing process, obviously I did, no one wants it to be positive. And I still, just had this, calling the whole time that I was reflecting on, and I was like, no, God was preparing me. I just always knew I had it. But there was a moment where I was like, if I don't have it, I'm going to feel like the biggest, the worst sister in the world, because how could my sister have it and I wouldn't? I was preparing myself for how would I feel getting a negative diagnosis and then having to watch her deteriorate. So I'm not trying to say that getting tested positive made that situation any better, but I literally for a while was like, what am I going to mentally do if I'm negative? Because I don't think I could wrap my head around why.
And I think of that, it's it is so interesting. When I listened to your other episode about deciding to get tested and stuff, I know that, I had said earlier, that when my cousin started to, that was really my introduction to Huntington's and what it meant really. And because I know that I think he was hesitant too, but there's that internal battle where it's almost a lose-lose,
right.
You either get tested and if you're gene positive, good in the sense where okay, let's start early. Let's start therapy. Let's start everything we can do early to help as much as we can now.
Right. Yep.
Well, we're not symptomatic, but then it's also, okay, well now I know for sure that I'm gene positive, and it being a family disease, you saw what happens or what's to come. So
yeah, it's never ending. And I mean, now that I'm closer and closer to getting married and having my own kids, it's frightening in a whole different aspect. Because I mean, that was part of the reason one of the many reasons I wanted to get tested was because, I always knew I wanted to be a mom at some point. Yeah. And I was like, well, I feel like I should know. I just feel like that's going to help me. It wasn't ever oh, I'm not going to have kids. I just wanted to know what that would look like for me. So, thank God. Have you heard of Help? There's so many HD ones. Have you heard of Help Cure HD?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. So I give them shout outs all the time, because I just think it's incredible that they're literally giving scholarship to people to do IVF, because God, it is so it's just so absurdly expensive. And I actually have a friend who was on the show, and to this day, as far as I know, she hasn't been tested, but she's at risk. So they still also accept at-risk people. So her and her husband went through it 2 years ago, and they provided her scholarship because she had lost the first couple tries that they did. And she still was able to apply, and they helped them continue on in their journey. And now they have a son who's probably at this point close to a year. But I just think what they're doing is incredible, because IVF is so expensive. So that's kind of, where my mind is at. But it's just weird, because it's I always expect, and I would love a kid regardless. It's not that's the end of the world. But you do grow up thinking oh, I'm going to have a kid naturally, and that's just how it's going to be. And now I gotta think about IVF. And then I also, on a non-HD note, I have PCOS, I found out almost a year ago. So I don't know enough about PCOS, but my sister, who's a nurse, actually asked me this when I was talking to her about it the other day. And she's like, is PCOS HD where you can just have it and it doesn't like progress until later, because growing up, I always had super heavy like periods. That was part of the reason I went on birth control, is because my periods were like so aggressive and painful. And then I was on it for 10 years. I wanted to get off because I was like, oh, I'll probably have kids in the next couple of years. I'll let myself just like naturally, get back on a, non-birth control routine. And then I just didn't have a period for 6 months. And so I went to the OBGYN. I had to do like all this blood work and ultrasounds. And then they came back and said, yeah, you've got PCOS. So of course there's all these stupid symptoms outside of just like not being able to regulate your periods. But on top of that, like I was very adamant I wasn't going to go back on birth control, because I was like, no, I want my body to like learn how to do this naturally. Yeah. Well, the pill that they put me on, which you take like the first week and a half of every month, it's supposed to like force your body to. Yeah, it just really wasn't working for me. And I was like, great. So they put me back on it after I was off of the pill for like a year and a half. So I'm like, well, I mean, it's great that I like on the pill I can, but it's still not like a real period. So I've got all these other issues that I'm like, great, when we go to have kids, I'm going to be like probably an emotional wreck. And it's not supposed to be like that. And that's what makes me sad. Like I have another friend who has PCOS, and her journey has been just awful. Like she's been married for maybe 6 or 8 months and she's not having any luck. But then I have other friends and family who, I mean, thank God, I'm happy for them, but it's like they just try and they get pregnant. I'm like, you don't have to worry about HD or, PCOS. And so if it's meant to happen, it'll happen. I'm like already getting stressed out about when that happens, because it's like I'm going to have to sign up for a scholarship and see if I get it, and just all these different things that it is nice. Like
we were talking about before, like the community being small but mighty, like
yes,
so receptive of like everything and anyone. Like it's so nice that there's so many different outlets, like even for scholarships and stuff like this. Like also everyone's, even you, like so open to like having me on here and like talk openly about it. And it's so great to see, honestly.
It is. No, it really is. And I think about that too, because I'm like, well, it could be worse. I could be, with HD and or PCOS and not having any opportunity to even apply for a scholarship, because when I went and researched them on their website, I think they started the same year that Champions started. So they're only like 4 or 5 years old too.
Yeah.
So it's crazy that they've been able to do so much in that time frame.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, God only gives you what you can handle. So.
Yeah. I believe you too. There's still times where I have conversations and I'm like, God, are we on the same level? Because I know sometimes so, like, I have all that you think I know.
Where you're like, okay, what's the plan here?
Yep. That's my imposter syndrome even playing an effect in my religion, which is never good. But I mean, it's real. It happens even to the best of us.
Yeah.
Well, before I let you go, this is my typical question I always end every show with. So, what would you tell someone who is battling HD or GHD right now as a word of advice?
I would say, like, from a medical standpoint, like, I hope that maybe someone could find, like, solace in the fact that, like, there are people like us and, like, other people in the medical field who are so dedicated to getting involved with this disease, learning more about it, teaching other people within medical careers about this disease. Like, advocacy is happening. It's slow. And I think that eventually we all band together, like, we will see progress.
Mm-hmm. So true. And you're making that step yourself one day, one class.
One class at a time.
One class at a time.
I do give props to Northeastern for, like, putting these slides in, and it made me so happy to see you. It's like when I'm flipping through or when it comes on the screen and I'm like, oh my God. And then even everyone in class will, like, look at me and I'm like, here it is. I can present on it.
That is beautiful, though, because it's those small steps that, you know, make a big difference when time passes and more and more people are doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Paige, thank you so much for coming on. And of course, you know that I will put everything in the show notes for people to click to. I already made a note to add it to the website, and then I can put your email too if you want me to.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'll send you like my flyer and stuff.
Perfect.
So that if anyone would like to participate.
Yeah, so you can put that on the website. I can cut it up to the point where it will fit on Instagram. And then we also have an e-newsletter that we try to do as much as possible, so we can do an e-blast about that too.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, so nice thank you.
To talk and finally see you.
I know. It was so good to see you and to meet you, and I'm going to be cheering you on to the finish line.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.